Sorry. Sorry for this technical reason, because we have an echo. We need to... Oh, so we shall continue. So as I said, today we will discuss very relevant and interesting topic. This topic is a very important, not only for the scholars, for professors, for business people, or even for politicians and for public, in order to assess the extent of the transformation of the world economy after the imposition of these sanctions. Sanctions in principle are not a new phenomenon in the global economy and polity, but the current sanctions on Russia coincided with the very serious and profound structural changes in the global economy and will obviously, I think, sharply intensify these changes. We saw in the last 2 years these dramatic changes of the structure of the world economy. And I think our esteemed speakers will shed a light on many aspects of such transformation and help us to foresee and forecast the future trends of these global economy developments. But before their speech, I would like to make some comments on this topic. First of all, unfortunately, we haven't yet the full range of the statistics to see the complex effect of these sanctions. After all, these sanctions were introduced for only 2 months, maybe 2.5 months, and gradually covered by the large sectors and new issues. And probably in the fall, maybe it's better in the end of the year, the first macroeconomic statistics will appear. For example, trade balance of payments and investment flows, portfolio flow statistics that help us to analyze these developments and midterm and structural effects of these sanctions. And next, we might see the direct and indirect effect of the sanctions. For example, take the capital flow statistics. It's important to see not only the current decline in flow of FDI in Russia, for example, but also the transfer of profits or remittance of undistributed incomes from this country under sanction, and as well as cessation of the operation of the many companies or postponed plan to invest capital expenditure in new project or in new developments in the country. So, for example, for some other indirect effects, it's very interesting to see how these sanctions affect on the brain drain on the Russia or the outflow of the skilled labor force from the country. So, as you see, there are a number of very interesting, controversial, and even complex issues to analyze. And I'm sure our speakers today will focus on the many of these issues. So let me introduce the first speaker. Our first speaker is Mr. Brian Chen Ming-Tai. He is a Deputy Director General, Silk Road Economic Development Research Center. And he will present the topic, Russian economy under sanctions, sanctions and the background. Please, Mr. Chen. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank everyone to join our webinar. And I would like to, sorry, there's some technical issues. Okay. Yes, and I would like to also thank Professor Chan and Professor Pichosa for giving me this opportunity to talk about Russia sanctions and the background. And in the later of the slides, I will also talk about the impact on the division of labor. So let's start our webinar. So firstly, I will briefly talk about the history of sanctions against Russia. So from the beginning, we have to know who imposed the sanction on Russia. It is a department of the U.S. Treasury Ministers, which is called Office of Foreign Asset Control, the so-called the OFAC, and they will impose sanctions and enforce economic and trade sanctions based on U.S. foreign policy and national security goals against target like terrorists or drug traffickers, and most importantly, the individuals or regime who are threatening the national security and foreign policy of the U.S. So as of 2022, there are 39 countries or regions are being sanctioned by the OFAC. So we can see from the chart below that the number of sanctions imposed by the OFAC is from 900 to now about nearly 10,000. So what's more, I think this is also important. You can see here the CSL, SDN, and EAR. So I will briefly introduce respectively. So the CSL stands for the Consolidated Scanning List. So it is a list of parties for which the U.S. government maintains restriction on certain exports, re-exports, or transfers of items. So basically, the people who are being sanctioned or individual being sanctioned, you can check on this list, and you can use an engine, a search engine called CSL search engine. And then you just type in the name, country, or source of agency, and you can search who are being sanctioned. So I believe that fund managers or compliance team, they are really familiar with this because this is for due diligence purposes. So for SDN, which stands for the Specially Designated Nationals, so actually their assets are blocked, and U.S. persons are generally prohibited from dealing with them. So, which means that if you are dealing with these people who are being sanctioned, that means you may get in trouble because the U.S. Government might impose sanction to you. More restriction. So, such designation often referred to as secondary sanctions, which is applied to companies in the third countries or regions. So the last one is the Export Administration Regulations. So it's more focused on items or products, especially a non-US made item. So when the value of the item is more than 25%, and the origin is from the sanctioned country, so it consists of the controlled U.S. origin content. So what are the differences between U.S. and the EU sanctions? Because not only the U.S. government impose sanction on different countries or regions, so actually the EU sanctions will usually immediately take effect, but for U.S. Sanctions, they usually give window period, like for the companies to have some reaction to the sanction and to exit the sanctioned country. So, and the U.S. sanction is slightly more broader than the EU counterparts. because the EU sanctions are applied on a pan-European basis, but penalties are just up to each member state. But for the US, sometimes it also applies to the foreign persons if they facilitate a significant transaction with any one sanction. So this slide is about the economy before the sanctions against Russia. So after the Russia annexed the Crimea, so the EU and US imposed sanctions on Russia, and you can see there's a significant drop, about 10% year on year. And also the total foreign debt and the for investment is also declining because of the sanction. So I believe that most of you already know what's happened because there's a lot of news about the Russia and Ukraine war in this year. So actually it's from in 2014, the Ukraine Orange Revolution, the relationship between Russia and Ukraine have been hostile. So in last year, Ukraine's planned to join the NATO, and so the Russians start to have some special military operations in February 24th. So, and then the G7 leaders persistently announced a new economic action, assert that Putin should be accountable for his continued assault on Ukraine and further isolate Russia from the global financial system. And we can see these countries are imposing sanctions on Russia this year, and regions, countries and regions. So the scope of the sanction on Russia, you can see there are lots of industry or sectors are fully covered, but only some exception that the U.S. government still allow U.S. citizens stay in the board of Russian companies, and there are some sectors which is about safety or government space, corporation, telecom, communication infrastructure are not being banned, but most of the sectors are being banned. So, as I mentioned before, actually from the Soviet Union, the US already imposed some sanction against the former Soviet Union, but now we talk about more recent history. So here we can see in 2014, since the Russia annexed Crimea, there are about 400. There are 480 entities being sanctioned, and it's more target on military sector, financial sector, and energy sector. It's not that broad as now. And in 2016, they claim that the U.S. the Russia interfered the U.S. election. So the U.S. government also imposed sanctions, but mainly the critical target is the Internet Research Agency, because they said that the Russia hackers was always hacking their system, including the government and military system. So they also imposed sanctions. And between 2018 to 20. Sanction against the Russian influence in Syria, Venezuela, and North Korea, but not that broad. So for this year, the main targets of sanction on Russia is mainly the financial institution and their subsidiary. So 83 in total. Maybe there are some updates. And of course, the two largest banks, the Sberbank and the VTB Bank, So there are state-owned companies, and there are more than 1,000 Russian individuals, so-called the oligarchs, are being sanctioned. So the really famous one, the Chelsea Football Club owner, Roman Abramovich, so his asset is being frozen by the UK government. And also the UK stopped the sales of a golden visa, which the visa is allowed the wealthy Russian to get the British residency rights. And so we go more into detail for the energy sector. From the pie chart here, we can see that actually the Russia is supplying nearly 40% of the natural gas to the EU countries. And actually now the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is suspended, so it's not working. But here's an interesting fact that actually the former German Chancellor Schroeder, he is the man behind the curtain to push this deal, to push this the completion of this pipeline. So he is, but recently he resigned it because of the international pressure. So here we can see there are more sanctions on the Russian energy sector. They are banning all the Russian oil and gas exports to them. But we can see that here from the chart here, we can see actually India, they are importing more and more oil from Russia because the Russian provide them a deep discount to them. Although the discount now is not that remarkable now, but still there's discount. And the U.S. has urged India and the African countries not to buy too much Russian oil. But actually, we can see that India still continue to import Russian oil. Why? Because it is there's no secondary sanction on the non-third world countries doing business with Russia. And from the international relationship perspective, so India actually is a really important country in the Eurasia continent. If they ruin the relationship with the India, maybe it will consolidate the partnership between Russia, China, and India. So maybe they will not impose a very strict sanction or secondary sanction on the countries who are dealing with Russia. And here, the EU just released the sixth sanction package on the 3rd of June 2022, which is more target on the energy sector. And here for the financial sector, I have already mentioned in the previous slides, and later Professor Pichosa will elaborate more on this. So we just, because time is running out, I guess. And here, of course, military goods, and because they are having a war currently. And sanction on transportation. So all the Russian flights have been banned from the airspace, and also including the private jets, and including vessels and other transporting goods by road within the EU, including in transit. So basically, the EU just totally banned, like closed the border between them and Russia. So for the aviation industry, interestingly, you can see from this chart, actually there's no, from the Flight Global map, you can see there's no plane like above the sky of the Ukraine. And here you can see the countries in red. So they banned the Russia flights to fly into their to their region. So there's a really great impact especially to the airliners and the air travelers. Yes. And more international companies are exiting Russia. Here, like the famous brand like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Starbucks, all these U.S. companies. And recently, the Russian company just convert the former McDonald's to a new one. So let's talk about Russia defense against global sanction. Actually, since 2014, Russia already began to de-dollarize, to start the de-dollarization, and also reducing the share of dollar in their foreign exchange. And all these measures, people call that the fortress Russia. So actually, we can say Russia is a bit get used to it. So they are a bit prepared for more stricter sanctions. So here we can see this from the financial perspective, and here also the Russia government also banned some important resources exports, like rare metals and of course oil and gas export to EU and US. And also they published an anti-sanction backlist of 59 foreign companies operating in Russia, and they are going to be nationalized, including Volkswagen, Apple, IKEA, Microsoft, IBM, Shell, blah blah blah. Here, yes, as their anti-sanction means to the Western countries. So I forgot to mention that actually the Russia major banks are being removed from this SWIFT system, so everybody knows already. And here also the credit card operation is also suspended in Russia. So they are now using like a domestic payment network called Mir payment network to avoid any impact. We try to ask UnionPay whether they like kind of help them, but the UnionPay afraid further sanction on them, so they refuse the. So here we can see like before and after February 22nd, 2022. So the amount of sanction. And actually, the former Secretary of Treasury said that there's no alternative to dollar and no export market as attractive as United States. But if Washington continues to force other nations to go along policies that they consider both illegal and unwise, they are likely to shift away the United States economy and financial system, because now Russia I think in April they just announced all the countries, if they want to buy their goods or energy products, they need to use the rubles. So actually it's like a global de-dollarization. I believe this is not a really proper term to say that, but maybe it will happen in the future. So now I would like to talk about the impact on the International Division of Labor. So firstly, I will briefly talk about the history from the 18th century, and then I will talk about the position of Division of Labor of the nowadays in Russia, and also the involvement in the global economy. So to give all of you a more clear picture of what's happening in the world.
它是有写第几章？
这最后一张可以看。
So the division of international division of labor is refers to the fact that economic production is transnational and intrinsically dependent correlatively on labor in different places.
这个没答吧？
And actually, division of labor is one of the most being mentioned topics being studied in the colonial areas, and it is deemed as one of the colonial behavior. And I divided into several stages for the divisional labor. So we can see here colonial era and since the industrial revolution, and then the divisional labor system centered on UK, and then global capitalism, and then a new international division of labor, and now it's more like a political economy. So, okay, sorry. So here, actually, division of labor play a significant role in the colonial area and led the reorganization of the world that then was. And the colonizer, so-called the European countries, industrialized the raw materials into finished products by utilizing their advanced technology back then. And actually, the raw materials is from the colonized regions. So this is the start, the beginning of the division of labor, and it is the start as well as the beginning of the globalization. So after the industrial revolution, so the UK start to distribute the or to reorganize the order of the division of labor. So actually it is centered on UK, and then here for the global capitalism, it is after the World War I. So industrial machineries gave rise to efficient and large-scale and low-cost production, and it is because this and the economies of scales in production activities to push the division of labor. So in the 1970s, after the Bretton Woods system collapsed, so many countries shifted from a fixed floating exchange rate regime from the Bretton Woods system, and then so the cross-border capital flows became more active, and what will happen is the production process is being fragmentized. So actually, for instance, like an aircraft, before that, the colonized regions, they are just providing raw materials. But because now they have cheaper labor, so actually those more labor-intensive products will be produced in these regions and then assembled in other countries. So the whole process is being more horizontal. So now the current situation is from 2008. From 2008. So now it's more political. Actually, the economy of the world, because you can see from here the deglobalization. Since the U.S. And China trade war, the rise of protectionism is getting more and more served in the world. So actually, the division of labor is being more regionalized. So and in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic also disrupted the global supply chain, and then which increased the effect of the protectionism, because the economy of each country is collapsing, so they need to shift their factories from the cheaper places to back to their own countries. So after this, I would like to talk about the division of labor of Russia currently. So here you can see, although Russia is not is not ranked first in crude oil production, but actually it provides a lot of oil to the world. And Russia is really important in the global supply chain, especially for those rare metals. Like here, I listed out some facts. 35% of the U.S. Palladium is sourced from Russia, and Russia supplies more than 45% of the world aerospace titanium parts. And Russia is the world's first exporter nitrogen fertilizer, and second in the potassium fertilizers. And also 70% of the nickel production and 15% of the class 1 nickel are supplied from Russia, which is for the batteries production, these elements. And 35% of the enriched uranium exports to the world. And this one is for the nuclear power stations. And the 30% of the world supply palladium, and this element is for producing the aerospace, aviation, navigation, weapons, and nuclear energy and other high-tech products. So we can see actually if the countries, if the Western countries banned the exports, and also the Russia issue some anti-sanctions measures or ways to ban the export to this country. Actually, there's a really critical impact on the global supply chain. Although from here we can see Russia is only ranked like 10th in this in the list in the contribution to the world, the economy. But actually the role of Russia in global supply chain is extremely critical. And also Ukraine, because now Ukraine cannot have their normal production. So the war also halts the supply of the neon in Ukraine. So it is a critical gas in advanced chip manufacturing for lasers. And 45% to 54% of the world semiconductor grade neon is only from these two Ukrainian companies. And it dominates 90% of the US imports. And for the iron and steel, actually EU imported about 22% from Russia and nearly 30% from Ukraine, and the US also import 34% of pig iron from Russia and nearly 30% from Ukraine in 2021. And also, but we know that if you want to produce steel, you need coal. And here, Russia supplies Ukraine 43% of the total coal, which means that actually the production of the iron and steel in these two countries is being suspended. So there's a really negative impact on the global supply chain. And more importantly, we have global food crisis right now, and you can see here, actually, the Russia and Ukraine ranked top 5 in the chart here for the global wheat export, which is a really main, which provides 15% of the world calories actually, and also the sunflower oil. These two countries also produce a lot and export to other countries. So when the war continues, so the global food crisis will only become more and more worse actually, because they cannot export the food to the countries. And here the supplies of the fertilizers, it is for farming and agricultural sector, which also have a really negative impact. And the US actually seeks to boost the supplies of fertilizer with the sanction to solve the global food crisis, but now the Russia is still banding to export the more fertilizers to the Western countries. On the other hand, actually Russia is really relying on the high-tech products. And we can see from this chart, a lot of high-tech products actually is import from the Western countries, and China, and also China. So now Russia is also getting into trouble because they do not have enough high-tech products for their to produce raw materials and other semi-processed products. So we can see this war and sanction is really serve impact on the global supply chain from all these slides. And it is a really interesting fact. What does the energy crisis mean to Russia? Actually, Russia, we can see the chart, these two charts below. The Russia GDP is highly linking to the international oil price. So now if the oil price keep going up, so we can see that actually we can predict that maybe the GDP of Russia will also goes up in this year. And I would like to also talk about the global value chain. The global value chain is a really important concept to the division of labor now in nowadays. So according to the World Bank Group, The global value chain refers to the segmentation and distribution of the product processes in different countries and regions. A series of stages in production and sale of goods and services that add value to the product, of which occur at least in 2 different countries. So, for example, companies in country B import raw materials from country A for processing. Then the country B participates in at least one GVC phase. So this concept is proposed by Koopman. And I would like to talk more about the backward participation and forward participation. So this is the explanation of different parameters. So let's focus on the forward and backward GVC participation rate. So the forward GVC participation rate means if a country or region is in the upper part of the industrial chain, it will mainly participate in international production by providing raw materials or intermediate products to other countries or regions. So this is called the GVC forward participation. And for backward GVC participation, if a country or region is the lower part in the industrial chain, the country or region will produce the final product mainly by importing raw materials or intermediate products from other countries or regions. So this is the backward participation. So now we have the concept, and so we can more understand the chart in the later slides. So the current situation for the global value chain. So we can see that from in 1990, actually the trend of the global value chain is going up. So which means the world economy is being globalized. But after 2008, the backward and forward partition rate is going down. So which means is a return of the protectionism, and it drives the trade flows from existing GVC back to their home countries or to the new locations. And the COVID-19 pandemic also slowed down the development of the GVCs actually. So let's talk about Russia in the GVC. So this chart is a bit outdated, but I tried to find more updated data, but I think we just have a big picture of this. So you can see that actually the forward participation is much higher than the backward. The Russia is in the upper link of the global value chain, which means they export more raw materials or semi-processed products to the world. And like the main trading partners is the Europe and Central Asian countries. They are the most dependent on Russia's largest export metals products, and as well as the energy. So here you can see the backward participation is below 10%, but the forward is nearly 40%. And we can see from this chart the global forward participation rate is below 20%. So which means actually Russia is playing a really significant role in the exporting. So here we can see these are the countries, the 10 most dependent markets are on imports from Russia. And here from the chart on the left, we can see like coal, petroleum, and other mining. They are occupying a really high percentage in this global value chain. So after we review all these charts, I believe that we have a concept that how important is Russia to the global value chain as well as the global supply chain. So actually, the BBC reporter Alan Little points out that Russia has become highly integrated into global economy, with the world dependent on its oil and gas and its industry dependent on imported goods and components. And Russians suffer badly from its exclusion from rich world and global business circle, and so does the world. Actually, this like can we call that a lose-lose situation? And here, it also could lead to a reversal of the globalized economy that emerged after the end of the Cold War. So maybe we can see a new Cold War is starting, because since the U.S.-China trade war, and then now the relationship between the Western countries and China and Russia is getting worse. So here the chart shows that the role of the Russia in global supply chain. So just we can see that how Russia is having importance in the global supply chain. Here, from the raw material supplier, we can see the Russia is exporting energy, minerals, and rare metals, just like I mentioned in the previous slides. So actually, the cost will transfer to the logistic, petrochemical, cement products, and all these agrichemical products. And here, actually, Russia produces a lot of automotive parts and aircraft parts. So now, if the Western countries ban them, so which means the manufacturer needs to find an alternative producer. So the cost will also increase. And here, for the next one, the manufacturer cycle. So they also produce raw steel and processed food, such as frozen fish, caviar, sunflower oil. So all these costs will increase, which means there are more stages, like from processing and then logistic transport to the ultimate consumer. All these parts will increase the price of the product, and it will transfer to the ultimate consumer. And so we can see that actually the Russia traditional sectors have been neglected, actually. So the French economist Jacques Sapir point out that the service sector nowadays is grossly overvalued compared with the industrial and commodity sectors. So so he said, just reducing the proportional importance of the service sector, actually Russia is larger than Germany, which accounts for about 6% of the world economy. I mean, he means reducing the importance of service sector. And then removing the global trade flows, Russia may account for 15% of the global economy. So in the previous slide, I mentioned that actually now Russia is only occupied about 2.5% of the global GDP. So now if we just get rid of all this service sector and global trade flows, so the real amount will float, and we can see. And actually, Russia is providing the basic needs products like food, energy, and commodities. So we all know that the service and technology is supported by these basic need products. So recently, the price of the service sector has recently plummeted. And this is also one of the measures that Russia to deal with the sanction. They are gradually shifting their focus to Asia. So more shipments of crude oil from Asia have been arriving Asian ports since February. India and China now growing their share of Russian shipped crude oil to almost 30% and 20% respectively. And also, Russia is upgrading their raw material processing sector in order to produce more value-added products. And Russia is also started to build its own catalyst facilities. So they are trying to shift to more value-added production in the global supply chain, but their competitive advantage apparently is their raw material and energy is really cheap. So here, these some our guess. So the impact in short terms. So there will be a really hyperinflation in short terms, and now we can see already especially in Western countries, cumulative, and it will have a cumulative effect because Russia plays a key role in the global supply chain, and China and India, which have benefited from Russian oil and gas supplies, are one of the factors keeping the inflation in check. And potential economic downturn in Russia and Commonwealth of Independent States, so-called the CIS countries. Most of them are these former Soviet Union members and their trading partners that depend on Russia for imports and export. They might suffer from economic downturn, but actually now it is not worse than expected. I believe that maybe in the Soviet Union they have a inner or intrinsic division of labor. So actually, they are going back to that era. So actually, the impact would not be that served to them actually than expected. And the growth in Eurozone will be lower than expected. And in some countries, the per capita income and development outcomes over the years will have been reversed. So in long terms, some possible outcomes may be not true. The international economic order is gradually failing and continue to get worse. And a dramatic reorganization is happening now currently of the global economy. And also the diversification of the settlement system, because Russia expanded from